It was a sunny Saturday in Lexington, Kentucky. Ethan's house was decorated with gold balloons, fresh flowers, and a large banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Dad." Everyone was smiling, the grandchildren were running around the yard, and the barbecue was almost ready. It seemed like one of those days that would become fond memories. But no one could have imagined what would happen hours later. Ethan, 69, had prepared everything with such care. He himself ordered the strawberry cream cake, his father Harold's favorite. Everyone was there, siblings, in-laws, neighbors, church friends, all to celebrate the family patriarch's 80th birthday. But there was a tension in the air that not everyone noticed in time. Before I continue, I want to say that I ask God to bless you with all His infinite love, giving you much health, peace, joy, and faith, for we can never lose faith in God, for He will never abandon us, for His love is eternal and infinite. I also take this opportunity to ask that you like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me a lot, thank you. Now, take a deep breath, because what happened next will shock you. Harold arrived with a shy smile, as if afraid to be seen. He carried a small box wrapped in plain paper. Seeing him, Ethan feigned surprise, but his eyes betrayed his discomfort. Even so, everyone applauded. A grandson ran to hug him. For a moment, it seemed the past had been forgotten. But just as Harold tried to step onto the makeshift stage to thank him, Ethan approached, snatched the microphone from his hand, and said something that sent chills down everyone's spine. "You weren't invited." Silence. A silence so heavy it drowned out even the sound of the birds. Old Harold, his eyes moist, looked at his own son, and then lowered his head. The crowd froze. Some laughed, thinking it was a joke. Others looked around, unsure how to react. Ethan's wife, Donna, tried to intervene, but was ignored. His father took a step back, as if searching for an exit. And then, he left the box on the ground and walked out, silently. On the floor, the little box lay forgotten, just like him. A neighbor tried to pick it up, but Ethan was quicker and discreetly kicked it under the table. No one understood a thing. The children were called to play, the music started again, and the party continued, but there was no longer any party in that backyard. Hours later, the buzz began. Why did he do this to his own father? Harold seemed so happy to be there. That's not right. The neighbors whispered, their eyes suspicious. Ethan, impassive, served pie as if nothing had happened. But inside, his heart was already beginning to twist. That night, Ethan's phone rang. It was his younger sister, Karen. She was furious. "What's gotten into you, Ethan? How dare you?" He hung up without answering. In his mind, there was a long-held conviction, he deserves it. But no one knew what was behind that anger. Not yet. On Sunday, the church pew where Harold usually sat was empty. The pastor mentioned, without naming names, that forgiveness is a divine gift and that the righteous are not always understood. Ethan listened with his eyes downcast. Something inside him was beginning to stir, as if a door were opening, or perhaps breaking down. Meanwhile, Harold spent the day sitting on the balcony of his modest apartment, clutching the same small box he'd retrieved from the floor before leaving. Inside was just an old photo frame, with a picture of the two of them fishing in 1989. And a handwritten note, "Thank you for everything you did for me, even when I didn't understand." In that image, the boy Ethan smiled toothlessly beside a suntanned father, holding a huge fish. The memory hurt. But Harold didn't cry. He just stared, as if waiting for time to correct what words cannot. Rumors swirled around the neighborhood. Some defended Ethan, others thought what he'd done was unforgivable. But no one knew the truth. Not even Donna. Only one man knew everything. And he lived next door. Mr. Lawrence was 82 years old and had a sharp memory. He'd seen it all unfold over the decades. He held a secret that could change everything. And that Sunday afternoon, something inside him said, "It's time." He wrote a letter, handwritten, his handwriting shaky but firm. He addressed it to Ethan and left it with his granddaughter, who promised to deliver it. The letter read, "What you did was cruel, but understandable, to a point. But you don't know the whole story. You need to know what really happened in 1992. Meanwhile, Ethan locked himself in his office, reviewing old family photos. He relived Christmas in 1995. Karen's 10th birthday. And then, an image caught his eye, his father on his knees, begging his mother for forgiveness. It made no sense. He'd always believed his father was the one in the wrong. Donna entered the room and found him in tears. "You never told me what happened between you two." Ethan replied bitterly, "I don't even know. I just know he destroyed our family." But was it true? The next day, when Ethan arrived home from work, he found Mr. Lawrence's letter on his desk. He hesitated. He opened it. He read it. And his hands began to shake. The letter revealed that in 1992, Harold had been threatened by someone close to him. That he had taken the blame for something he didn't do. That his leaving home was a silent sacrifice to protect Ethan and Karen. And the most incredible thing of all, there was proof. Lawrence enclosed a copy of an old document, a never-released police report. And at the bottom, a handwritten note from Harold, "I will never tell the truth, because I would rather be hated by my son than see him destroyed by his mother's guilt." Ethan was shocked. He looked again at the framed photo his father had left him and felt something tear inside him. How could he have spent so long hating a man who loved him so much? He ran to his car and drove to his father's small apartment, but no one was home. He knocked on the door and called dozens of times. Nothing. The second-floor neighbor said he saw Harold leaving with a suitcase. He said he was going to visit someone in Nashville. Ethan returned home with his heart pounding. For the first time in decades, he felt lost, desperate, and most terrifyingly, regretful. Karen appeared with an envelope in her hands. It was another letter from his father. "Don't blame yourself, son. I understand. One day you will understand too." And that knocked him down. That night, Ethan dreamed of Harold smiling on the porch, beckoning him to go fishing. He woke in tears. Donna hugged him silently. There was no more room for pride. And there, within that pain, a new feeling was born, the need to know the whole truth. No matter who it hurts. Because he needed to understand why a father would accept being hated in the name of love. And maybe, just maybe, Mr. Lawrence hadn't told everything yet. The silence in Harold's apartment was filled only by the ticking of the old wall clock. Sitting at the kitchen table, he held a cup of cold coffee. His eyes were lost in a past no one else seemed to remember. But for him, every detail still throbbed in his chest. There was a closet in his room, locked for years. Inside, he kept the remnants of happier days, children's drawings, Christmas notes, a stuffed bunny Ethan had cuddled in his sleep when he was 5. Everything was there, untouched, yet full of life. And every time he opened that door, his heart bled a little more. That morning, Harold decided to clear everything out. He spread the objects out on the bed and touched each item as if caressing a memory. He found a cassette tape with Ethan's voice, recorded in Sunday school, saying, "My hero is my dad because he always comes to get me, even when it rains." It destroyed him inside. Outside, the world went on, cars, neighbors, barking dogs. But for Harold, time seemed to stand still there, amid old toys and frozen smiles in yellowed photographs. It was as if his story had been ripped from the pages of a book and thrown away by someone who never read it carefully. In the nightstand drawer, he found an old diary. The pages were stained with the dampness of years. But one in particular had a hand-scrawled note, "Today, Ethan fell off his bike. He cried. I hugged him, and he stopped crying. I guess this is what being a father means." The pain came like a wave. Harold never understood how love could turn to contempt. How a son he'd raised with such care could feel such anger. But deep down he knew. He had chosen silence. He chose to protect. And now he was paying the price for it. It was a kind of love the world doesn't understand. Back then, he worked as a plumber. He woke up at 5 and returned at 7. He often arrived and helped Ethan with his homework. He remembered nights he slept on the couch, just so as not to wake his wife with a headache. Small sacrifices that were never counted. He smiled as he remembered the day he took Ethan to a Cincinnati Reds game. They wore matching caps and ate hot dogs until they were sick. "That was the best day of my life, Daddy," the boy shouted. And Harold believed nothing would ever separate them. How could he have imagined? But life pulled them both in different directions. First came the marital conflicts. Then came the unfair accusations. And finally, silence. A silence crueler than any scream. Harold never had a chance to explain himself, because no one wanted to listen. Not even the son he loved so much. The neighbor, Mr. Lawrence, watched it all happen, year after year. He was the only one who knew the full truth. But Harold made him promise not to tell. Not for me. For Ethan. He needs to grow up with the image of the mother he loves. And that's how the lie became routine. That afternoon, Harold turned on the old radio. A church hymn played, one of those that speaks of forgiveness and rebirth. He closed his eyes and prayed silently. Lord, if it is your will, let my son discover the truth. But if not, help me endure. For my heart is already so weary. Meanwhile, Ethan turned over his neighbor's letter in his hands. Each word resonated. He looked at the photos and could no longer see the villain he'd imagined. The pieces were starting to fall apart. It was as if his life story had been told backward. And now, everything seemed uncertain. He remembered a detail. One Christmas when Harold showed up unexpectedly and took a hidden gift. At the time, everyone thought it was strange. But now, Ethan understood. It was the same toy he'd asked his mother for, and which she'd said she couldn't give. But someone heard. And bought it. Ethan slowly began revisiting memories that once seemed insignificant. Like the day he fell from the school roof and saw his father come running back, his work apron still stained with paint. Or the note hidden in his lunchbox, "You are braver than you think." These things came back with a vengeance. And they brought with them difficult questions. If he loved me so much, why did he leave? That was what hurt. But now, there was another, even scarier question. What if he didn't leave of his own free will? The neighbor across the street, Mrs. Mary Beth, confirmed something disturbing. Your father never stopped visiting you. He'd come, sit in the car, wait for you to get out of school. But your mother never let him near. Ethan froze. He'd never been told this. Never. Harold, at that very moment, was walking slowly through the park where he used to take his son. He sat on the same wooden bench, now worn. He closed his eyes and smiled, remembering the sound of Ethan's laughter. A laughter he hadn't heard in over 20 years. But he could still hear it in his soul. Suddenly, a boy ran past wearing a red cap, just like Ethan's. It was like a punch in the gut. Harold stood up, turned his face away, and let a tear fall. But he kept walking. Because parents who truly love keep going, even when their hearts are broken. Ethan couldn't sleep. He felt the weight of each memory like a brick on his chest. He opened his father's old Bible, which he had put away without realizing it. A photo fell out. It was him, still a baby, with Harold holding him as if he were the most precious thing in the world. Behind the photo, an underlined phrase, "Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things." That's when he understood. Maybe all his father ever wanted was to just participate. Participate in birthdays, Christmases, games, graduations. Not as a last-minute guest, but as a father. As a presence. As a part of the family. Ethan was overcome with a mixture of regret and urgency. He needed to find Harold. He needed to say something he'd never had the courage to say. But where was he now? Meanwhile, Harold entered a small church down the road. He sat in the back pew and prayed. Lord, watch over my son. Even if he never forgives me, may he find peace. A pastor approached and greeted him kindly. Are you carrying anything heavy, my friend? Harold simply nodded. That night, as the two men, father and son, thought of each other miles apart, something invisible began to move. As if the sky itself were preparing the ground for a reunion that still seemed impossible. Because sometimes, life needs to break us before it can rebuild us. And there was much more to be revealed. The morning after the party seemed like an ordinary day in suburban Lexington. But inside Ethan's house, the silence was deafening. There was no laughter from the children, no smell of coffee. Donna moved around the kitchen like a shadow. And in the bedroom, Ethan stared at the ceiling as if searching for answers in the cracks in the wall. He hadn't yet told anyone about his neighbor's letter. He tucked it inside an old Bible and locked it in his office. But his mind wouldn't stop. The words echoed like thunder. You need to know what really happened in 1992. Ethan sensed something much bigger was about to surface. Donna tried to make conversation at breakfast. You need to call your dad. Ethan just mumbled, he doesn't want to listen to me. But deep down, he knew he was lying. Because maybe, he was the one who wasn't ready to hear what his dad had to say. And that hurt more than he imagined. Around town, word of the party was already spreading like wildfire. Harold's friend Joe's barbershop became the center of gossip. Did you see what Ethan did to the old man? They said his father left crying. That's a sin. People judged and pointed. But no one knew the full truth. Harold, for his part, spent Sunday alone. He didn't call anyone. He didn't leave the house. He just sat in the blue armchair he'd refurbished himself and stayed there. The TV was on a religious program. But his eyes, fixed on nothing. As if he were waiting for time to pass. Or end. On the screen, the pastor spoke about the prodigal son. Even when the son turns away, the father runs to meet him. Harold smiled, but sadly. Because he had always been the father, who waited, who endured, who loved in silence. And now, it seemed not even God was listening to his pain. Ethan, at the same time, locked himself in his office. He opened the Bible where he'd hidden the letter. He read it again. Reread it. He tried to understand. He took the blame to protect someone. But who? He thought of his mother, but couldn't fit the pieces together. It was like a 1,000-part puzzle, where the picture was still blurry. Karen called again. Ethan, what you did was cruel. He replied curtly, you don't know what he did to us. She was silent for a few seconds. Then she said something that cut him to the quick. Maybe, you don't even know. And she hung up. It was like a slap in the face. Ethan stood there, staring at the phone. In the backyard, the children's swing swayed in the wind. Empty. Silent. Donna looked out the window and sighed. She knew something was wrong. Something much bigger than just a disagreement between father and son. It was as if the soul of that house was sick, and no one knew how to cure it. In the neighborhood, Mr. Lawrence received visits from curious neighbors. But he simply said, things aren't always what they seem. A simple phrase, but one that left everyone suspicious. The mystery grew, and the deeper it grew, the more Ethan's silence bothered everyone. On Monday, Ethan went to work. But he couldn't concentrate. Every customer seemed to look at him as if they knew what he'd done. Deep down, it was just guilt. A guilt that was slowly beginning to corrode, like rust on a steel structure. And there was no emotional tool to remove it. At the end of the day, he returned home early. He found Donna sitting on the stairs with a box in her hands. I found this in the attic. Inside the box were old letters from Harold. Addressed to Ethan, but never delivered. Your mother hid them. Donna's eyes were watering. Ethan, paralyzed. He read the first letter. It was from when he was 12. Son, I know you're mad at me, but I want you to know that I love you every day. I pray for you every night. Ethan's voice cracked. His hands shook. And the truth began to seep in where before there had only been judgment. That night, he walked down the block. Alone. Trying to process everything. He stopped in front of Mr. Lawrence's house, but didn't knock. He just stood there, staring at the door, as if it might open on its own and reveal what he needed to know. But sometimes, the greatest silence comes from our own cowardice. Meanwhile, Harold wrote another letter. Only this time, he didn't know to whom. He wrote as if pouring his heart out to God. Lord, if my time is near, please, let my son know that I have never stopped loving him. He folded the paper, placed it inside his Bible, and took a deep breath. The next day, Donna took the kids to school. Ethan stayed home. He took all of his father's letters and read them one by one. He cried like he hadn't cried in years. It was as if he'd rediscovered a buried part of himself. A part that screamed, "You don't know everything." At the bottom of the last letter was a handwritten passage from the Bible. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." Ethan read it aloud, like a prayer. And he understood, even if he didn't understand everything. Harold never abandoned him. He simply endured in silence. Out of love. On Wednesday, Mr. Lawrence left an envelope under Ethan's door. On it was a single sentence: "If you want to hear the whole truth, come to my house. I'm waiting." Ethan held the paper in his hands for several long minutes. And then, something began to stir inside him. But it wasn't until Friday that he worked up the courage to go. He knocked on the door, and the old neighbor greeted him with a tight hug. "There are things you need to hear, young man." Ethan nodded. And then they sat on the porch. And everything began to be told, unhurriedly, without beating around the bush, without omissions. What no one knew was that Harold wasn't just a victim. He was a silent hero. And what Lawrence revealed would change everything. Because behind that silence lay a story no one wanted to hear, and now, finally, it was beginning to be told. And at the center of it all was a buried truth that involved not only Ethan, but his entire family. A truth that would show that, sometimes, the biggest villain is the poorly told story. And there was more. Much more. The neighborhood buzz began quietly, like people speaking softly to avoid causing trouble. But it took only a week for the conversations to gain momentum. At the bakery, the pharmacy, even in the church group, the topic was the same: what happened between Ethan and his father? Everyone had a version. None of them were complete. Mrs. Mary Beth, who lives around the corner, swore she heard screams before the party started. Mr. Collins said he saw Harold leave with tears in his eyes. Neighborhood children were saying that their grandfather was kicked out because he did something really bad. And so, the suppositions became truth in the gossip mills. In the midst of it all, Mr. Lawrence watched silently. He sat on the porch, his straw hat on his head, his eyes alert. He disliked commotion, but he hated even more seeing injustice go unheeded for so long. And something in his conscience began to weigh heavily, like an alarm bell from above. Lawrence had known Harold since 1983. They had worked together on the construction of a local school. They raised their children on the same street and played cards on Saturdays. He saw, with his own eyes, the day Harold left home, and knew the story his family had been told was a lie. For decades, Lawrence had kept quiet out of respect. But seeing Ethan repeat the mistakes of the past, it hurt deeply. And what bothered him most was knowing that Harold had been the one to pay the price for something others had caused. "Enough," he muttered to himself. "It's past time." That afternoon, Lawrence searched for an old shoebox, stored under his bed. Inside were papers, notes, and a copy of an old note. He read it all over again, to make sure his memory wasn't failing him. And then he decided it was time to tell Harold's son everything. Across the street, Ethan washed his car in silence. His thoughts were racing. The letter, the memories, the letters Donna had discovered. He felt he was on the verge of something big. But he didn't know what. When he saw Lawrence slowly cross the street, his heart raced. "We need to talk," Lawrence said. Ethan hesitated. He wanted to run away. But something in the old man's voice stopped him. They sat under the shade of an oak tree in the backyard. Lawrence pulled out a yellowed envelope and placed it on the table. "Are you ready to hear what no one else has had the courage to tell you?" Ethan just nodded. His hands were sweating. And Lawrence began to speak. "Your father didn't leave by choice. He was forced." Ethan's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" The neighbor took a deep breath. "Your mother found out, and threatened to expose the family, destroy everything. Harold kept quiet for you." The first revelation came as a bombshell. Harold had discovered an affair. And to avoid tarnishing Ethan's mother's image in front of her children, he decided to take the blame for a fight he didn't cause. He left home without explanation. And he never told her anything, not even when he was rejected. Ethan was in shock. "This can't be," Lawrence continued. "He showed me a letter from your mother, threatening her. It said that if he said anything, he would never see his children again. And he believed it." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "So, he sacrificed himself for us?" Lawrence nodded. "Yes. And he never stopped loving you." The second twist came even more cruelly. Lawrence handed Ethan a handwritten note from Harold, dated 1993, "Today is my boy's birthday." Hiding behind the school fence, I saw him blowing out the candles. Ethan clutched the note to his chest. He wept unashamedly. For the first time, he felt the pain of someone he judged without understanding. And it was unbearable. "Why didn't he ever tell me?" Lawrence replied wisely, "Because a father's love, a son, sometimes he chooses to be beaten in silence just to protect you." In the third revelation, Lawrence revealed something Ethan never would have imagined. "Did you know Harold paid for your education in secret?" Ethan frowned. "My mother said it was her new husband." Lawrence shook his head. "No. It was your father. He worked twice as hard and sent the money anonymously." Ethan's world crumbled. Every childhood memory now seemed to have a new shine, a new layer. He understood that he'd grown up in a castle built on a lie, and that perhaps the only one who acted honorably was the man he'd kicked out of his own party. "Why didn't you ever tell me this before?" Ethan asked. Lawrence answered honestly, "Because Harold asked me to. He said true love endures. But after what you did, I thought he couldn't take it anymore." Those words were like knives to Ethan's heart. The conversation lasted hours. Lawrence showed evidence, documents, even an old recording where Harold said, "If my son ever finds out the truth, let him know that my biggest mistake was loving too much." Ethan was silent. It was all too much. And yet, it wasn't all. "There's more, isn't there?" Ethan asked. Lawrence hesitated. "There is, but this part, he's the one who has to tell you." And with that, he got up and went home, leaving Ethan alone with his conscience, and with a new mission, to find his father. And finally hear what remained to be said. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He reread the notes, connecting the dots. He felt guilt, sadness, but also hope. Because there was still time. And most importantly, there was love. Even after everything. The next day, he went to his father's house. But it was empty. The doorman said Harold had gone out of town. He said he needed to think about his life. Ethan returned with a heavy heart. But now, he wasn't going to give up. Meanwhile, Harold visited the family's old cabin in Tennessee, a place Ethan had loved as a child. He lit a fire, made coffee, and wrote another letter. "Son, maybe you understand a little now. But the hardest part hasn't been said yet. Because the biggest secret had yet to be revealed. And that could change everything forever." The envelope was old, almost fraying at the edges. Ethan found it at the bottom of a box in the old garage where his father stored tools. It was a place no one had touched in years, but something had led him there. And as he opened the letter, the air grew heavier, as if time had finally decided to speak. The handwriting was familiar, shaky, but full of feeling. If you're reading this, it's because the silence has finally been broken. And maybe now you're ready to understand. Ethan sat on the floor, amidst boxes and dust. Each word seemed to burn like a hot iron. The truth was beginning to unravel like a decades-old loose thread. "That night in 1992, I didn't leave home by choice." The sentence froze Ethan. He'd always believed his father had abandoned everything. But the letter said otherwise. "Your mother discovered something she couldn't accept. And she gave me two options: leave quietly or destroy your childhood with the truth." Ethan trembled. The letter continued. "I chose to protect you, even though I knew I would lose you." And then, the first shock, his mother had been involved with another man, not after the separation, but before. And it was Harold who found out. The pain, at that time, was so great that he considered exposing everything. But he didn't have the courage. Later, Harold described the exact moment he decided to leave. "I heard you crying in the room, confused by the fighting. And I realized that if I fought, I would destroy everything. I chose to be the villain of the story, so that you could still love at least one of us." That broke Ethan inside. "I know you grew up hating me, but I never stopped loving you." The letter continued with details about secret school visits, gifts left anonymously, bills paid in other people's names. Ethan began to realize that his entire life had been sustained by a silent love. Invisible, but present. Then came the first big twist. The letter you received from Mr. Lawrence is only half the story. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? There's something even he doesn't know. Something that could change everything you believe about our family. Ethan's heart raced. His hand trembled. And then he turned the page. Your maternal grandfather didn't die as you believe. Ethan froze. He was admitted to a mental institution after an emotional breakdown. And do you know who cared for him in the last years of his life? Me. Your father. Ethan's mind went into overdrive. It was as if he were discovering a parallel universe. The letter explained that Harold took on the responsibility when no one else would. He'd shout your name in the hallways. He'd say you were the most beautiful grandson in the world. Ethan never knew this. His mother always said his grandfather had died when he was little. Another lie exposed. At the end of the letter, Harold wrote something that echoed like a prayer. If you ever find out, don't forgive me for leaving. Forgive me for loving so much that I erased myself. Ethan burst into tears. This wasn't just a letter. It was a testament to pain, sacrifice, and faith. It was then that he found, inside the envelope, a small wooden cross. The same one he had lost as a child during a trip to the cabin. The cross was intact. On the back was a verse engraved with a penknife. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Ethan couldn't take it anymore. He ran to his car, drove to the nearest church, and knelt. He said nothing. He just cried. It was all too much. But also liberating. For the first time, he understood his father. Not as a perfect man, but as someone who chose to suffer in silence out of love. At the altar, the pastor saw him and approached. Do you need help, son? Ethan replied with a trembling voice, I need to find my father, before it's too late. And it was there, kneeling, that he decided to do something he'd avoided for 20 years. Forgive. Not just Harold, but himself as well. Meanwhile, Harold returned to the cabin. He carried firewood in his arms and hope in his heart. He didn't know his son had read the letter. He didn't know that Ethan was now, miles away, ready to change everything. But deep down, maybe he knew. Because parents always feel it when their children come home, even if only in their hearts. Ethan now wanted to know everything. Every detail. Every secret. The lie had crumbled. And he needed to rebuild his own story with the buried truths. And in the midst of it all, a question arose that had never touched him before. What else did my mother hide? That weekend, he decided to confront her. Donna tried to stop him, but Ethan was determined. He found his mother sitting on the porch, as she did every Sunday. And when she saw him with the letter in his hands, she understood. So, you found out. Her expression wasn't one of shock. It was one of relief. Why, Mom? Was all she could say. She looked at the ground, took a deep breath, and replied, Because I was afraid. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of facing my own mistakes. And then she began to tell her side of the story, something Ethan never expected to hear. She admitted to cheating. She said she fell in love with another man during a difficult time in her marriage. But she also confessed something even deeper. I knew your father was better than me. And that destroyed me inside. So I chose to destroy him, before he left me. Those words stung. But Ethan didn't feel hate. He felt pity. For the first time, he saw his mother as human. Full of flaws, insecurities, and bad decisions. And it was then that something in his heart began to heal. Because forgiveness is stopping the bleeding for something that already happened. Before leaving, Ethan hugged her. I'm going to find Dad. And I'm going to apologize. She cried. Tell him. I'm sorry too. The path of truth had begun to be walked. And even if there were still wounds, at least now, they were being touched with truth. On the way back, Ethan passed the school where he'd gone to school as a child. He stopped the car and looked at the playground. He remembered the man standing across the street. The same man he'd thought was a stranger. Now he knew. It was his father. It always had been. That night, Donna set the table with 3 places. For when he gets back. Ethan smiled, his eyes welling up. I hope it's not too late. But something in his chest told him there was still time. That the bond wasn't broken. Just dormant. And meanwhile, in the Tennessee cabin, Harold was writing another letter. This time, a farewell. Because he felt that perhaps his mission was nearing its end. But what he didn't know was that someone was already on their way. And that meeting would change everything. The drive to the cabin felt longer than Ethan remembered. At every turn in the road, old memories surfaced like ghosts. Family picnics, fishing trips with his father, marshmallow nights by the fireplace. All of it now felt like part of a story he'd never truly understood. In the passenger seat, his father's letter lay folded, but alive. It was as if it pulsed, demanding the truth be completed. Ethan knew he was about to hear the rest. What no one had the courage to tell. And for the first time, he didn't want answers just out of anger. He wanted them out of love. When he arrived at the cabin, he spotted Harold's old car parked next to the well. The sound of wind in the trees and the smell of damp wood filled the room. He knocked hard on the door, his heart racing. And when the door opened, time froze. Harold was there, thinner, his eyes sunken, but still with that sweet look. For a second, neither of them said a word. They just stared at each other. And then, Ethan did what decades ago seemed impossible. He hugged his father. Tight. Long. Like someone holding onto something they almost lost. Harold wept helplessly. I thought I'd never see you again, my son. Ethan replied, his voice breaking, I thought that too, and I was wrong. They sat before the fireplace, and the silence that had once hurt now healed. It was time for the truth. The truth that hurt. But also freed. I read it all, Dad. But there are parts one still don't understand. Mom, she said she made a mistake. But there's more to it, isn't there? Harold sighed, looked into the fire, and began to tell. When everything started to fall apart, I tried to fight. But I was overcome by a silent war. He explained that the crisis in their marriage didn't begin with the betrayal. It began with the separation. With the long workdays, the nights without conversation, the loneliness shared under the same roof. She fell in love with another man, and I was the last to realize. Harold found hidden letters, messages on the phone from the time. He tried to talk. He tried to forgive. But each attempt was rejected. And when I confronted her, she turned the tables. She said if I said anything, she'd take you away from me. That destroyed Ethan once again. I thought about taking you with me. But I didn't have the courage. I thought you'd have more stability with her. More structure. But today, I wonder if I left you vulnerable to the biggest lie of your life. Ethan held his father's hand. No. You did what you thought was right. And now, I understand. Harold then revealed something no one knew. Your grandfather found out about the betrayal. He tried to intervene. But she institutionalized him as if he'd lost his mind. He never had a chance to defend himself. This was the final piece of the puzzle. The final layer of injustice Ethan needed to swallow. And the other man? Ethan asked. Harold looked into his son's eyes. He disappeared. When your mother saw he wouldn't admit anything, she looked for me. But I was too broken to go back. It was a cruel detail. She didn't want him back out of love, but out of fear. Ethan took a deep breath. Do you still love her? Harold took a moment to answer. No. But I forgave her. Because hate is a poison we drink, hoping the other person will die. And I didn't want to live like that anymore. Those words were like a bomb. A lesson. A lesson from soul to soul. They spent hours talking. Reminiscing. Getting emotional. Ethan told him about the letters, about Mr. Lawrence, about everything that now made sense. And Harold just listened, silent tears in his eyes. As if he'd waited a lifetime for this moment. Before bed, Harold handed him a final letter. I wrote it when you got married. I never had the courage to give it to you. But now, I think you should read it. Ethan read it. And cried. His father spoke of the pride of seeing him become a man, a father, a citizen. even without having been a part of it, even from afar. The next morning, Harold made pancakes like old times. Ethan smiled. It was as if time had gone back, if only for a moment. But there was something in the air. A feeling. And Harold seemed to feel it too. "There's something I need to tell you. Maybe the hardest one." Ethan stopped chewing. "What is it?" Harold hesitated. "I was diagnosed with a heart condition 3 months ago. The doctor said it's serious. I'm running out of time." Ethan put down his utensils. "No, you can't leave me now. Not now that I've found you." Harold held his son's hand. "I'm not leaving you, son. I'm just going to a place where love no longer needs to be tested. It will be eternal." They cried together. But there was peace in Harold's eyes. The peace of someone who had finally been heard. Of someone who had been embraced by the one who mattered most. That day, Ethan promised something. "I will honor your story, Dad. I will tell my children the truth. I will make sure your name is remembered not for what they said, but for who you really were." And Harold simply replied, "That's more than I could ask for." Before they said goodbye, Harold asked if they could pray together. Hands held, eyes closed, hearts open. "Lord, thank you for bringing us together. Thank you for healing where time has wounded. May your love continue to guide us, even when we are no longer here." Ethan returned home a different man. Something inside him had been reborn. He knew time was short. But now, every second with his father would be precious forever. And deep down, he knew the most painful part of the story had been revealed. But what he didn't know was that his father's last words, in the hospital, would still come like an arrow, and change his soul forever. The next morning began with a gray sky, as if time itself respected what was to come. Ethan returned to the cabin with his children. He wanted them to meet their grandfather. He wanted them to hear from his own mouth what silence had kept silent for so many years. And Harold, though frail, smiled like a child. The children ran to him, not surprised. It was as if their hearts recognized love. Ethan watched the scene with teary eyes. "Why did I wait so long?" he thought. But seeing his father smiling at his grandchildren, he knew there was still time. At least, enough. During lunch, Harold pulled a small box from under the bed. "This is for you, Ethan." Inside were newspaper clippings, old photos, children's drawings in Ethan's crooked handwriting. "I kept it all, even when I had no hope of ever seeing you again." That made Ethan break down. At the bottom of the box was a smaller envelope, sealed with tape. "This letter was written by your mother and me, before the separation." Ethan looked at Harold in surprise. "You wrote this together?" And then came the first twist. "Yes. It was a pact." Harold explained, "Before everything fell apart, we made a deal. If anything went wrong, we wouldn't expose each other in front of you. Even if it hurt. Even if it was unfair. It was our way of protecting you and your sister." Ethan was speechless. "But, Dad, why didn't I ever know about this?" Harold lowered his eyes. "Because, after she broke the pact, I chose to continue honoring my part, even if she didn't do the same." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. A man who chose to suffer in silence, just to maintain the dignity of the one who betrayed him. The letter, written in 2 different handwritings, began, "If you're ever reading this, it's because everything got out of our control." It was the testimony of a broken couple, still trying to save their children from emotional shipwreck. An attempt to create a wall between their mistake and their children's innocence. "Our love is over, but our commitment to Ethan and Karen cannot end with it." The sentence was clear, strong, painful. Ethan never imagined his parents, so different, could agree on something so important. And yet, the pact was broken. "She couldn't bear the weight of her own mistake," Harold said. "And she chose to erase me from history to try to write a version where she wasn't the villain." Ethan heard this with a mixture of anger and compassion. For the first time, he could see the complexity of human beings. The flaws. The frailties. "You don't have to hate her, son. You just need to know that I chose to carry the guilt, because I thought that was what a father should do." Harold's maturity was surprising. Even betrayed, humiliated, and alienated, he didn't seek revenge. He sought peace. That was all. Ethan treasured the letter. And he understood that the pact wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a decision of love. A pact of silence that, even when broken, revealed the character of those who remained faithful to the end. This taught him more about fatherhood than any book or advice. That night, Ethan came home and told Karen everything. She cried on the phone. "I always felt like something was wrong, but no one would tell me." Now the two brothers were on the same side, unified by the truth. And more than that, united by a newfound respect for their father. Days later, Ethan took Harold to the hospital for tests. The doctor confirmed the heart problem was serious. But there was time for treatment. Hope shone again. And Ethan promised to care for his father as he never could. "Now it's my turn, Dad." During hospital sessions, Harold befriended the nurses, told jokes, and prayed with other patients. And Ethan observed it all. How could this man have been hated for so long, he wondered. And seeing his father's kindness in action, he understood, the world is cruel to those who love in silence. During one of the visits, Donna showed up unexpectedly. She carried flowers and an envelope. Ethan was taken aback. "She wanted to see you." Harold greeted her warmly. "Thank you for taking care of our children." The simple phrase was enough to break the ice. They both cried. And peace finally arrived. Inside the envelope were old photos. A time when the family still smiled together. Harold looked at each image fondly. "It wasn't all a lie," Donna said. "I just didn't know how to deal with my mistakes." And Harold responded with something Ethan would never forget: "God knows how to separate mistakes from love." The following week, something unexpected happened. The neighborhood church invited Harold to give a testimony. He stepped up to the pulpit, shyly but firmly. He told his story, not as a victim, but as a man who chose to forgive. And the impact was immediate. People wept, gave a standing ovation. Harold ended his speech with a verse, "Love never fails." He looked at Ethan, who held his children in his arms. That image would be remembered forever. Because it was the day a story of pain became a legacy of faith. On the way home, Ethan thanked his father. "You're the bravest man I know." Harold smiled. "I was only a father, in my own twisted way. But with all the love I had." Ethan held back tears. Because he understood, love doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real. And in that moment, he realized that the pact made decades ago was not in vain. Because even broken, it served to teach that true love doesn't seek reasons. It simply endures. It endures. And waits. Until it is understood. But what no one expected was that, during the next exam, something even more profound would happen. And Harold's final words, in the hospital, would change the course of history irreversibly. The hospital was quieter that morning. Ethan arrived early, as usual, with a coffee in hand and a heavy heart. Something had been nagging at him since the night before. A premonition. An uneasiness. And when he saw his father's empty room, his blood ran cold. He went to the reception, worried. The nurse reassured him, "Your father is having tests. But he asked you to wait, said he wanted to talk to you today," calmly. That only increased the tension. Because Harold never put off what he could say at the time. Minutes later, Harold appeared in his wheelchair, pushed by a smiling nurse. "Look who's here to visit me," he joked. But Ethan noticed. Something was different. His eyes were sunken. His face was paler. And there was an envelope in his hands. "Son, before anything else, I need you to listen to me. Without interrupting. Promise." Ethan nodded, his heart already aching. Harold handed him the envelope. "Read it later. But know that everything I've experienced, I would do it again. For your life. For your peace." They talked for hours. Harold spoke of his youth, his mistakes, his dashed dreams. Ethan listened to it all. But something still gnawed at him inside. Until, in a moment of silence, he broke down. "Dad, why did you let me feel so much hatred? Why did you never fight for me openly?" Harold took a deep breath. Then he said, Because I saw in your eyes that you weren't ready to listen. And I preferred to be hated than to make you lose your mother. I fought, son. But I fought alone. And sometimes, fighting in silence is the cruelest way to love. Ethan cried. But it was a different kind of cry. A cry of guilt mixed with admiration. You're better than I deserve. Harold smiled, touching his son's face. Don't say that. You're the fruit of my love. And no father expects perfection from a child. He just hopes he understands, one day. It was then that Harold said something unexpected. I need to apologize. Ethan's eyes widened. Forgiveness? Why? You don't owe me anything. But Harold insisted, I do owe you. For not being strong enough to stay. For not knocking on doors until you heard me. I gave up, too soon. That sentence hit Ethan like a bolt of lightning. Because he'd never imagined his father would also carry guilt. He'd always seen him as a victim. But now he saw a whole man, flawed, remorseful, human. And in that moment, something inside him finally broke. To rebuild itself. Father, I owe you forgiveness too. For expelling you. For judging you. For reducing you to what I was told, without ever listening to you. And then, the two embraced like never before. Not as father and son, but as two men who found each other after a lifetime of silence. At the door, the nurse wept quietly. She'd seen a lot in that hospital. But never such a profound reconciliation. And when Harold looked at her and said, Life is short, girl. Don't hold a grudge against those who love you. She ran to call her own father. Later, Donna arrived with Karen and the children. Everyone was there, surrounding Harold, like a family that had bled deeply but was now healing. Karen, who had always been more reserved, knelt beside her father's bed and said, I'm sorry I didn't come after you sooner. I missed you, but I pretended I didn't. Harold took her hand and said tenderly, I understood you, even in your silence. That hospital, for a few hours, became home. A place of reunions, of truth spoken, of forgiveness released. And also, of one last secret. Son, remember the envelope I gave you? Ethan pulled it out of his pocket. Yes. Open it now. I want everyone to hear it. Inside was an old, typewritten sheet of paper, signed by Harold and another name. It was a will. And what was written there? No one expected. Harold left everything he owned to his grandchildren. But more than just possessions, there was a letter enclosed with spiritual instructions. Teach them about forgiveness. Teach them about God's love. Don't let future generations inherit our silence, inherit our love. Ethan read aloud, tearful. I didn't have the chance to raise my children fully. But if I can leave one legacy, let it be this: never let pride keep you from the ones you love. The silence after the reading was profound, and filled with reverence. At the end of the letter, Harold wrote something that would be remembered forever. Home is not where we live. It's where we are understood. Ethan hugged his father, whispering, Now I understand everything. Late, but I understand. And Harold replied, It's never too late when there's still love. And so, the reunion was sealed with peace. But there was one more chapter. One more scene written by God. Because the most profound moment was yet to come. The hospital would become the scene of something even greater, Harold's last words. And that sentence would change everything. Hospital room 407 no longer felt like an ordinary room. The walls, once cold, were now covered in drawings from his grandchildren, flowers left by neighbors, and cards with Bible verses. Harold, even weakened, smiled like never before. It was as if his heart, even though it was aching, was finally at peace. Ethan arrived every day, promptly at 7. She'd get her father's favorite coffee, tell old jokes, read the Bible aloud. It was a routine they'd never had before, and now they made a point of savoring every last second, as if trying to recover decades in a few days. Karen also came often. She brought childhood memories, school photos, letters she'd found at the bottom of a drawer. All of this rekindled Harold's sense that, even though he was hurt, life was still worth living. Because now, he was surrounded by everything he'd ever wanted: love. Donna, for her part, made a point of taking care of the details. She bought a new blanket, decorated the room with Harold's favorite things, and even baked cookies with the children. "He deserves a proper ending," she told Ethan. But even she didn't know, that ending would still contain an unforgettable moment. One rainy morning, Harold woke up feeling weaker. The doctors noticed the change. They called the family. Ethan, holding his father's hand, tried to hide his fear. "Are you okay, Dad?" Harold smiled. "I'm more alive than ever, son. Because now I see you, just like I always dreamed." Visiting hours were permitted outside of normal hours. The hospital chaplain was called. Harold asked for a prayer aloud. "Lord, thank you for letting me see my son return. Thank you for letting me forgive and be forgiven." Everyone was silent. It was as if heaven were there, listening. Ethan asked if his father wanted anything. Harold replied with a calm look, "I just want to tell you one thing. The last one." Everyone stopped. He looked at Ethan, tears in his eyes, and said, "I've never left you, son. Not for a single day." It was like a gentle thunderclap, shaking everyone's hearts. Ethan fell to his knees. He wept like a child. His father's words touched something deep, an old wound that was finally closing. "Even when you hated me, I loved you. Even when you threw me away, I kept waiting for you." And then Harold closed his eyes. But he didn't leave at that moment. He simply slept. A deep sleep of someone who had fulfilled his mission. The doctors said it was an advanced stage of his condition. But everyone knew it wasn't a farewell. It was a rest. Well-deserved. Holy. In the days that followed, Ethan transformed. He began visiting hospitals and telling his father's story to young people at community centers. Every time I said, "My father never left me," more people became emotional. It was as if Harold was still speaking, even when silent. The children began praying every night for Grandpa. Karen decided to write a book about the family history. And Donna reconnected with God. "I didn't know how to love, but I can still learn to forgive." The transformation touched everyone, like a silent miracle. At the hospital, the nurses said they'd never seen a story like it. A man who entered discredited and left a legend. When Harold finally left, weeks later, he had a smile on his face. And with the Bible open to Psalm 23 on his chest. The funeral was simple but full of love. Ethan read his father's last letter aloud. In it, Harold wrote, "The pain passes. The love remains. And forgiveness brings us closer to God." Everyone wept. But it wasn't sadness. It was gratitude. At the end of the burial, Ethan placed the wooden cross, the one he'd found in the old letter, on the coffin. "You were the hero no one saw. But God always saw." And then, the sky grew brighter, as if the Lord himself were there, saying, "Mission accomplished." Back at the cabin, Ethan found an envelope hidden under the bed. It was Harold's last letter. "Son, if you're reading this, it's because you've understood me. And now, all I ask of you is that you teach your children never to repeat our silence." Ethan cried again. But now, he cried lightly. Because within that pain, there was peace. Because within the loss, there was presence. Harold was in everything. In the advice, in the memories, in the values. And more than that, he was inside him. The last sentence stuck in everyone's mind, "I never left you, son." And that truth echoed in Ethan's heart every day. In moments of joy, in struggles, in hugs with his children. It was as if Harold were constantly saying, "I'm here. I always have been." And in that echo, a new mission was born. The mission to be the kind of father who listens, who speaks, who forgives, who stays. Because true love doesn't give up. But Harold's legacy was still just beginning. And the new chance to start over would come as an unexpected gift. Life after Harold's departure didn't return to normal, it transformed. Ethan woke up earlier, made coffee, and wrote letters to his children, even though they lived in the same house. Just so they know that love needs to be written and lived. It was his way of keeping the legacy alive. At the now renovated cabin, Ethan took his grandchildren every month. He told stories about Grandpa, showed them the antique fishing rod and the rocking chair. "Here, we learn about love and forgiveness," he said. It was more than a place. It was a sanctuary of memories and hope. Karen released the book 6 months after the funeral, Letters from a Father Who Never Left. The title alone made hearts race. The content, then, became a testimony. Mothers, fathers, children, everyone found a piece of their own story there. An unexpected healing. Donna, now active in the church, started a support group for women who have experienced family trauma. Not as an expert, but as someone who made mistakes, suffered, and was forgiven. And there, amid tears and hugs, she rediscovered a piece of herself she thought she had lost forever. Ethan, for his part, began speaking at schools, prisons, and shelters. He told Harold's story with emotion and conviction. He always ended with the same sentence, "My father's love reached me, even after everything." And every time he said it, he felt Harold beside him. The grandchildren grew up knowing they had the best grandfather in the world. One who left an inheritance not in money, but in values. Who taught, with silence, faith, and sacrifice, that true love doesn't need to be shouted at. It just needs to stay. And Harold stayed. Years later, Ethan received a letter in the mail. It was from a young man who had read Karen's book. "I was going to kill myself. But I read your story, and I decided to forgive my father." Ethan cried. Because he understood, Harold's legacy didn't end in a coffin. He was changing lives. One Sunday at church, the pastor called Ethan to give a surprise testimony. He stepped up to the pulpit with his father's Bible in his hands. He told everything, his voice breaking. And at the end, he said, "If you still have a father, hug him today. If he hurt you, try to hear what he couldn't say." The church fell silent. An elderly woman stood up in tears. "I haven't spoken to my son since 2003. But today, I'm going to call him." And so, Harold's story lived on. From heart to heart. From tear to tear. From forgiveness to forgiveness. In her backyard, Ethan planted a tree. A cherry tree. Beside it, she placed a sign, "Here begins the new cycle of our family." Every spring, the flowers bloom as if the sky itself reminds her, pain may pass, but love blooms again. The children would ask, "Is Grandpa in heaven?" Ethan would answer with a smile, "Yes. But he's here too." And he'd point to his chest. Because Harold had become more than a memory. He'd become a presence. And with every act of kindness, it was as if he were saying, "You are not alone." Karen was invited to give an interview on a major network. She told her story live, in front of millions. And when asked, "What would you say to your dad today?" she looked into the camera and replied, "Thank you for not giving up on me. Even when I gave up on you." Ethan, watching from home, cried. But it was a beautiful cry. Because now, the past no longer hurt. It was sacred memory. And the future was full of purpose. "What my father planted in me, I will plant in my grandchildren." And with that, the wheel of grace kept turning. One day, while walking through the park, Ethan saw a man yelling at his son. Something inside him made him stop. He walked over, touched the man's shoulder, and said, "Don't let pride keep you two apart. I wasted too much time with my father, and barely had a chance to make amends." The man fell silent. He returned home and wrote in his diary, "Today, I helped someone not repeat my story. Perhaps that is the true legacy." And as he closed the notebook, he felt something inexplicable, peace. A peace that came from God, and from the memory of a father who was always there, even in silence. The cabin now had a new sign, Harold's Place, where love waits. Families began visiting. People who heard the story and wanted to experience the place where it all happened. And the energy there, it was almost palpable. As if forgiveness lived in that land. Donna and Ethan renewed their wedding vows there. Not because they'd forgotten the past, but because they'd decided not to let it define them. Their love, despite its cracks, endured. Because it was watered with repentance, truth, and faith. Karen got married soon after, in the same cabin. He wore his mother's necklace and held his father's Bible as he said, "I do." It was symbolic. It was poetic. And Harold, was there, in every detail. Like a breath. Like a presence no one sees, but everyone feels. At the children's birthday parties, Ethan always set aside an empty chair. He'd place his father's old cap on it. "It's for Grandpa," he'd say. And the little ones would wave to the sky. It became a tradition. And it also became healing. Because where there are good memories, there is eternity. One random afternoon, Ethan wrote his last letter to his father. He buried it beside the cherry tree. It simply said, "I understand you. And now, I am you to my children." It was the shortest letter, and the most powerful. And with that, the cycle was complete. Not with an ending, but with a new beginning. Because love, when it's true, doesn't end. It just changes shape. And continues. How many times do we fail to listen to those who love us most, just because we believe the easy version of the story? How many times does silence destroy more than any harsh words? Harold and Ethan's story isn't just about father and son. It's about me, about you, about all of us. How many letters are hidden deep in our emotional drawers? How many apologies have never been made, out of pride, fear, or hurt? And most importantly, is there still time to say what needs to be said? Maybe you have someone who deserves to hear, "I'm sorry." Or maybe you're the one who needs to say, "I understand you now." And if this story touched you in any way, it's because God also wants to heal something inside. Because He still unites families. He still transforms hearts. He still gives new chances. Have you ever experienced something similar to this story? Have you ever judged someone before listening to what their silence meant? What would you do if you discovered someone suffered in silence, just to protect you? Share with me in the comments. Your experience may touch others' lives too. And if you want to keep hearing real moving stories that touch the heart and nourish the soul, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any future stories. We still have a lot to experience together here. Before you go, I pray for you. May God restore every broken relationship in your life. May He bring healing where there is pain, love where there is distance, and faith where there is weariness. Because the journey is not over. It is only beginning. And you are never alone.